I love looking back at all the wonderful video games that are released each year, and 2024 delivered plenty worth talking about. While Nintendo Switch is winding down with the announcement of a successor console, it still had a few heavy-hitting games left to give. I also delved into a good number of indie titles on Steam and Xbox Game Pass, but at the tail end of the year, I adopted my first PlayStation console, so in total, I had a lot of amazing games to choose from for this list. But even still, I couldn't play every game that released in 2024. Some notable exceptions include Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Black Myth Wukong, and Helldivers 2. So just note that if you see a great game absent from this list completely, that might be why. Let me know the best of what I missed in the comments. I decided to rethink many of my categories this year. In thinking about how Jeff Keighley and company run the Game Awards, I got to thinking about how insufficient it is for them to do categories by game genre. Many genres, such as horror and puzzle games, do not have categories of their own in that show. And then, some of the games seem to overlap, like action and action-adventure. It got me wondering if there was a better way to dissect what games do well, and I got to thinking about what those genres have in common in a broad sense. I'll elaborate on each category as they come up, but we'll be seeing awards in 4 sections: visuals, gameplay, immersion, and some miscellaneous extras. I'll name off my personal top 5 games of 2024 across each category in order from 5th to 1st, ultimately choosing a winner for each. It's likely you'll disagree with at least some of my opinions, so feel free to chime in with your own picks respectfully in the comments. And if you like what I'm doing here, do consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, here are our nominees and winners. We will begin with the visual categories. The best box art. This first set of visuals does not appear in any of the respective games, outside of perhaps a loading screen or a title screen. But it is immensely important in getting the game into the hands of players. A piece of key art that you would find in a box or as a thumbnail on a digital storefront is the team's first chance to convey the reasons that a player should pick up the game. The art needs to convey the spirit of the game, and perhaps even go so far as to convey elements of the game's story or mechanics. These are my top 5 pieces from 2024. Visions of Mana. Quality art on par with the past Mana games. This game features a floral frame around the cast of playable characters. The Mana Goddess and her tree shine in the center of the background to convey the character's ultimate destination. Number 4, Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake. A painterly style gives a sense of scale, as the direction of the brush strokes conveys both a far-off distance and a blowing wind, which hit our main character's cape. Erdrick looks on, conveying his determination as he sets off on his dragon quest. Number 3, Super Mario Party Jamboree. I ended up knocking this a little lower on the list due to it feeling a bit crowded, but the box art packs in so many references to the different modes available in Jamboree. We see Daisy and Waluigi in the midst of a minigame. Bowser and company make pancakes in the Rhythm Kitchen to mixed results. Luigi wears the wings from the Paratroopa Flight School, and Mario holds the dice block from the main Mario Party attraction. All of this is displayed radially around the game's logo to resemble an explosion of fun. And with a distinct, eye-catching white and yellow color scheme, I think it's safe to say the box art accomplishes exactly what it set out to do. Number 2, Another Crab's Treasure. The main draw is the logo, shaped like the wave of the ocean. But when you take a closer look at this key art, you see that it manages to show our main character amidst friends and foes. On the left side, light pokes through the water's surface to show friendly NPCs and the world they inhabit, while on the right, a shadow is cast over mindless crab enemies, including one particularly large boss with glowing eyes. In the foreground, we see a hint to the game's central mechanic and story. The trash scattered about drives the central conflict, but our main character will also be collecting it across the game to use as a protective shell in combat. Number 1. The winner for Best Box Art of 2024 is Emio, the Smiling Man, Famicom Detective Club. I did not know that this was my favorite box art at first glance. It pulled off a truly unique feat and had me growing fonder the more I played the game. It's only after seeing how the story ends that you truly come to understand what everything in the key art represents. The title character looms tall over our protagonists. Everything is cast in purple, but our protagonist's faces break through the lavender haze, which gives them a glowing outline to make them stand out while retaining their in-game color palettes. Each protagonist has their own take on a shocked expression as they face outward. The contrast between their stricken faces and the static expression painted onto Emio's paper bag perfectly encapsulates the character dynamics, while additional images in the background hint at the game's overall storyline. A strong art direction commits to a game's distinct visual identity and ensures all elements convey a unified stylistic choice. Number 5. Neva. You might be surprised to see this game as low as number 5. Neva follows in the footsteps of its studio's first release, Grease, with its watercolor aesthetics. Each chapter of the game commits to a primary color to convey tone and emotion. You can chalk this ranking up to personal taste and the feeling that it doesn't totally set itself apart from Grease. Number 4. Mario and Luigi Brothership. This game finally brings the concept art style from across the Mario and Luigi series to life in a gorgeous and fully expressive manner. The most notable stylistic choice is the color gradients used to shade characters from different angles. The art style truly allows the game's animations to shine through. Number 3. Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. This game is an homage to a certain style of game made for the old Philips CDI console. It absolutely nails the look it's striving for, while still smoothing out some, but intentionally not all, of the rough edges for a modern release. Between the color palettes, character outlines, and environments, the game is a callback in all the best senses, making a case for a style that was considered off-putting. Number 2. Phoenix Springs. This is a point-and-click mystery game with a rapturous style. Seeing as the game demands a player move from screen to screen, the still images serving as the game environments are immensely important. The main feature that this game brings is the contrast between stark blacks and saturated colors. The heavy use of dark shadows contributes to the general atmosphere of it all. But number 1 is Unicorn Overlord. You might be familiar with Vanillaware's art style from past games such as 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. In Unicorn Overlord, the style translates wonderfully to a fantasy setting. The lighting, for lack of a better word, is a highlight. But I would also like to shout out the battle backgrounds in particular. When we zoom into the action, we see intricate details like grass flowing in the wind. This should not sell short the overworld, though. While it's mostly topographical, the use of three-dimensional features for towns and facilities helps make things pop. Characters are the lifeblood of a game. They give the player a link to the in-game world. But in order to draw the player into their stories, each character needs to have their personality on display. Literally. These are my picks for the games with the best character design. Number 5, Another Crab's Treasure. The team did a great job of translating human personality traits into appropriate sea life. The true standouts are the boss designs. Each one manages to be intimidating in its own unique way. Number 4, Metaphor Refantasio. Metaphor features a wide cast of characters across 8 fictional races. Some races' defining features stand out a bit more than others, particularly those which more closely resemble animals than humans, though I need to be careful talking about humans in Metaphor, as that word has a particular meaning in that game. The main cast of playable characters is the main attraction. Each character has their own color palette to help them stand apart. Number 3, Iron Chronicle 100 Heroes. Fortunately, a game that prides itself on having literally 100 heroes excels at its character design, else I don't think having that many playable characters would be nearly as much of a draw. This game might have ranked higher had I played further into it, but from what I've seen of the game's intro sequence and internet screenshots, I still felt the need to commend the developers for the sheer volume of character designs and the efforts taken to give each one a clear visual identity. Number 2, UFO 50. Across 50 games, you are bound to find at least some good character designs. Not every game has discernible characters, as you might control vehicles instead, but there are many inclusions here with a classic feel. Mini and Max have a feel of 1950s elegance, while any of the competitive multiplayer games has its own roster of wonderfully expressive characters. Heck, Party House, a single one of the 50 minigames, has nearly 20 distinct designs for the types of party guests you can invite, and all of those designs are done within the realm of pixel art to embody the 1980s gaming era. If there is one design I'm not a huge fan of, it's the pilot from the main game series, Campanella, but it's not enough to bring down the experience. However, number 1 is the Plucky Squire. I knew this game would win this award the second I saw the characters in-game. The Plucky Squire takes place inside a child's storybook, and the characters are made to match. The characters' designs are made with simpler shapes, and the facial features are large for the sake of expression. The design simplicity contributes to their elegance. Thrash is a head-banging troll with a headband, note that's one letter away from headbang, with colors matching his drumsticks. Violet is a mage who wields a paintbrush, and her typical mage's hat is colored like a paintbrush dipped in paint. Of course, you have Moonbeard, the Merlin-like wizard with a moon-plastered robe and a beard shaped like a crescent moon. The list goes on. But most of all, I need a plushie of the first overworld enemy, and I want to squeeze it. One major component of any video game is its world. These are the games that gave players a visually splendorous world to immerse themselves in. Number 5, Pepper Grinder. With a mix of hard and soft surfaces, Pepper Grinder's levels are designed in a satisfying way for its drill-based platforming. Each level allows you to get into a flow state where you can chain dashes and drills together to keep motion through the environment. Sure, you'll often destroy parts of the environment to serve that end, but it is a satisfying world to watch crumble. Number 4, Animal Well. This is lower on my list for being a little difficult to parse at times. That said, there is an option in the game to disable the CRT line filter, which not everyone will prefer, but was beneficial to me. This game still deserves a spot on this list for its striking use of the color blue, leading to the mystique of the world, and the sheer level of detail that went into crafting an environment that would naturally allow players to find its many secrets through experimentation. Number 3, Another Crab's Treasure. The team behind Another Crab's Treasure did a fantastic job of reimagining ocean biomes to fit with their Souls-like experience. Some highlights include a castle of sand and the final 2 areas of the game, which I'll refrain from spoiling here, but both create an air of intimidation in complete opposite ways from each other. In fact, the game as a whole gets progressively darker and more desolate as you go along. So in that way, the environments help to naturally convey the tone of the narrative. You may begin by platforming across rainbow-colored coral, but by the end, I highly suggest playing for yourself to find out. Number 2, Dungeons of Hinterberg. This game takes inspiration from the region of Austria with the same name. The team took great care to create both the titular dungeons as well as several overworld areas. I think the fact that the overworld contains scenic areas at which your character can just pass the time meditating while the camera pans around speaks to the team's confidence in their environments, and rightfully so. During the game, you'll explore plains, an autumnal forest, a snowy mountain, and a rainy swamp. each of which are reimagined with more fantastical elements as you enter a dungeon. In one example, the swamp houses dungeons that are set in an underwater castle. Naturally, any good dungeon requires good design, such that the player will be able to navigate and puzzle out solutions, and I'm happy to say the game succeeds in both regards. Number 1. Neva. The absolute highlight of Neva is the team's commitment to the background art. There were several moments where I took a screenshot just to capture the beauty of that piece for later. The game might be a 2D side-scroller, but so many of the environments showcase depth. You might get a vista of a mountain in the distance, or find yourself in a forest through which light filters in. My favorite moments in the game take place in an icy area, full of different shades of blue. The reflective surfaces end up playing a role not only in the aesthetics, but in a portion of the gameplay as well. Since the game tells the story of a dark force overwhelming a natural world, it was essential for the art team to nail the foundation of natural beauty. Every speck of in-game paint contributes to an astounding whole. Once the world and characters are built, a team of animators is put in charge of bringing the models to life through motion. These are my favorite animations in games of 2024. Number 5, Astrobot. Astrobot is a constant celebration, not only of IPs that have graced the PlayStation, but of the expressiveness and fun that any video game can deliver. And that can be seen in its myriad animations. You'll find bots dancing around, helping each other reach new areas of the crash site, and upon getting certain pulls from the gotcha machine, performing an animation that corresponds to their game of origin. Astrobot can also be praised for its animation on a technical level. Across the slew of levels, you will often find a high volume of objects with independent physics. It is a joy to witness Astro interact with these objects, ranging from floating pool toys to leaves and more. Number 4, Neva. Neva includes some pre-rendered animations, and of course they're as gorgeous as the game surrounding them. However, I have to give the developers due credit for increasing their repertoire from Greece. Neva features combat, and as such, the main character's attacks have to be animated, as do the enemies. Yet the game never misses a beat. Each animation is smooth and flows naturally from one to the next. This is especially impressive for the player character's ranged attack, in which Neva flies towards its target. On top of this, many environments fall apart during escape sequences. Number 3, Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. This game perfectly emulates the feel of animations from certain games in the CDI era. The deliberate choppiness and the slightly off-putting take on stretch and squash leave the game awash in the charm of its homage. I know it probably sounds backwards to call the animations technically impressive, when by today's standards, they are absolutely not. But I think it's precisely because the tools used in the industry are up to today's standards that it's actually impressive the team managed to make the animations look as uncannily antique as they did. Number 2, Princess Peach Showtime. Showtime is a game predicated on its stage play premise. Goodfeel brings every element to life in a diegetic manner, such as glowing bats that are animated as though they are emanating from a projector. Each costume that Peach adorns comes with its own set of animations as well. Some standouts include the cowgirl and its marionette horse, the figure skater with its true-to-life forms, and the kung fu fighter with its fast-paced action. Each costume also gives Peach a unique idle animation, and as an added bonus, Peach can slide down the banisters of the theater's staircases. And number 1, Mario and Luigi Brothership. Much of the game's humor is derived from Mario and Luigi's reactions to events in the story. Each time I saw a new animation grace a Mario Brothers face, I was given a profound sense of joy. I must also give credit to each area transition. The bros are shot out of a cannon and have an animation of landing on that island, but each one is unique, largely due to Luigi botching the landing in different ways. Battles are the star of the animation show, though. Even when idle, the bros are full of life, as their animations show their readiness and anticipation. Each attack is performed in multiple stages, with animations varying depending on if the player hits the correct timing on button commands. Animations have always been a central pillar of the Mario and Luigi series, as enemy animations are used for the player to telegraph attacks for the sake of timing a dodge or counter attack. Brothership simply takes what already worked about Mario and Luigi's expressive and practical animations and dials them up to a modern standard of quality. Next, we have the gameplay categories. While visuals are nice to appreciate and can convince a player to give your game a chance, mechanics are a big factor in keeping people playing. Whether it's hard-hitting action or something more turn-based, many games, regardless of genre, have players interact with an antagonistic force. These are the games with the best combat. Number 5. One thing I like about Dungeons of Hinterberg is how the magical abilities you acquire are tied to each region, thus forcing you to fight in different ways throughout the game. Your magic takes the place of dungeon items, thus you use it to solve puzzles, but the same spells each have combat utility. Apart from your magic, this is mostly a typical action-based combat system with weak attacks and strong attacks forming combos. Speaking of action combat, number 4 is Stellar Blade. The game is pretty typical fare for the most part. Light and strong attack combos for melee, a ranged weapon with different ammo types, and the ability to block or dodge at the last moment to parry or counter enemy attacks respectively. The one thing that made it stand apart enough for me to include it on this list is some additional skills that you can unlock that you can trigger against certain enemy attacks. Depending on what they do, if you dodge towards an enemy or dodge away from an enemy, you get a special reaction attack. I found enemies were punishing me for pulling off counterattacks later in the game, which on the one hand encouraged me to switch up my strategies, but on the other hand was just plain annoying. As you traverse the 2D Metroidvania world of the Lost Crown, you'll come across your fair share of enemies. Your player character, Sargon, predominantly fights using dual blades, but later gets an additional ranged option to build on. Its regular encounters, your main goal is to keep enemies under control, and the best way to do that is to combine your typical dodging and countering skills with combos that will juggle the enemy. It can be very satisfying to force enemies into the air, hold them there, and slam them back down for extra damage as you get good at the game. There were some truly compelling boss battles to be had as well. You can't usually juggle them due to their overwhelming size, but they'll put your dodging and countering skills to the test and reward you with stylish, heavy-hitting attack animations. There is room to customize your combat abilities using in-game accessories that you collect along the way. Number 2. Metaphor ReFantazio is the culmination of so many Atlas projects that came before, and nowhere is this more apparent than in its combat. Fans of Shin Megami Tensei will recognize the press turn system. In combat, each turn, you start with one icon per party member. If you strike a weakness or land a critical hit, you'll only consume half an icon on your turn. But if the enemy dodges or is immune to your attack, you will lose 2 at once. Your party also learns combo skills in which multiple characters contribute to an attack and expend additional turn icons, but as a trade-off, the skill is quite powerful. This same set of rules applies to the enemy party. During the game, you can learn skills or find equipment that may augment turn icons in different ways, but as a base system, it's simple enough to understand and rewards player strategy. Additionally, you can manage party members' positions between the front and back rows, and customize your character's abilities using different classes, referred to as archetypes in this game. Any character can learn any class, and its corresponding skills given enough time and resources, thus giving the player some custom control. But number 1, another Crab's Treasure. This was my first Souls-like experience. I had always been intimidated by the genre, given its infamous difficulty. Yet, Another Crab's Treasure had so much charm, I couldn't help but take advantage of my Game Pass subscription and try the game. I was happy to find accessibility toggles that made the game click with me, and a combat system that felt wildly fun. Whereas games like Metaphor will have you planning out your strategy in advance, and that's fun in its own way, Another Crab's Treasure demands that you adapt to combat situations in the heat of the moment. The key feature of combat is the shell system. Krill can wear a variety of shells, many of which offer unique effects or even additional attack options. However, it is his only source of defense. If you want to block or parry attacks, you will be using your shell, and its own independent health bar will deplete by some amount. Once your shell's health runs out, you'll have to find a new one lying around in the environment. This is a natural way to encourage experimentation and force players out of their comfort zone. My favorite addition had to be the grappling hook, used in combat to either rope an enemy towards you or vice versa. It allowed for some stylish combos that served the practical purpose of keeping it going past its initial few hits. As you progress in the game, you unlock additional skills, each of which feels like a huge boost in power. Plus, players can further customize their experience by spending XP on stat bonuses in one of 4 areas. When you aren't fighting enemies, you may find yourself traversing a game world. Sometimes an entire genre of game, like a platformer, is built on the premise of figuring out how to get from point A to point B, and in other genres, it is merely a step that happens between the main tenets of the genre. But in either case, these are the best examples of traversal that I found in 2024. Number 5. Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble. Monkey Ball made a proper return. In the past, the formula was botched with the addition of a jump button. Here in Banana Rumble, that jump is still present for those who want it, but it works much better as a toggleable option than as a mandated choice that influenced the level design. That said, while just having the stage tilting traversal back in its core form would have been satisfying enough on its own, Banana Rumble actually introduces a new traversal option that doesn't ruin the game. In fact, it provides more opportunity for player experimentation and potential for speedrunning. The dash is right at home in Monkey Ball as an option that can keep your monkey on the ground or launch them in the air. It can also aid at quick, tight turns or crossing gaps. Number 4. It's not a platformer, but like many good RPGs, Metaphor has you traversing a world. While in towns, you can walk, dash, sword surf, or dash while sword surfing to navigate at a speed of your choosing. Fast travel points are plentiful, so backtracking is never an issue. When moving to a new area for the first time, you'll ride your Gauntlet Runner, which will expend in-game days of travel time, but you have activities to keep you busy on the trip, so there's never too much downtime. I think the system helps build the scale of the world without making it a pain to traverse, and you can teleport back to any place that you've been before after getting far enough, so it doesn't detract from player convenience either. Number 3. Penny's Big Breakaway. This would probably be higher on most people's lists, but honestly, the game just doesn't click for me. It's still a cool system worth mentioning though. The game takes what works about the momentum-based movement of games such as the original Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy and puts it into a 3D platformer. More skilled players than I can chain moves together to make Penny fly through the air, swinging on her yo-yo, or making a brief landing to roll along a slope and build speed. Combining rolls, swings, and dashes in various ways is the key to making the most of the Big Breakaway experience. Number 2, Astrobot. Astrobot delivers clean, precision 3D platforming. It may not be as expressive as Penny, but it makes up for that in my eyes by being easier to control and by introducing a slew of power-ups that change up how the traversal works level to level. You might use a balloon to float to high areas, extendable fists to swing across sticky axles, or a rocket to propel yourself upwards. The list goes on, but every moment of traversing levels in Astrobot is a joy. And some of the challenging stages can get to be pretty precise. In some cases, every little morsel of platform matters, such as when you need to cool down lava-covered floors and traverse over breakable glass. Astro has a brief hover to fine-tune your jumps, but it also emits laser beams, which will harm anything beneath, including the aforementioned breakable surfaces. Number 1. Pepper Grinder. Pepper Grinder is frenetic and fun. Traversing levels in this game made me feel more adept than Penny's Big Breakaway ever did. It is an utter joy to dive into a diggable area, then maneuver around using my drill's turning radius, and popping out of the surface again to gain air. Adding your dash ability onto this allows you to jump gaps or reach high up places. Some puzzle mechanics get woven in where you need to carefully aim your drill to make your destination accessible, or you need to execute a maneuver with the right timing. A few later levels give Pepper a few extra abilities to contribute to a power fantasy. I can only imagine the speedrunning scene for this game. After all, those players know the drill. Traversal focuses on the means by which players navigate the environment. But a game can also feature exploration, which focuses on rewarding players for investigating the environment and giving them the tools to do so. Number 5. Endless Ocean Luminous. If the ocean is endless, it means there's much to explore, right? I'll be honest. At first, this entry in the franchise, my first experience with the franchise actually, felt soulless. In the main story, your companion is a monotone AI. But I had a few chances to go online with a friend, and this shifted my opinion in a slightly more positive direction. In online lobbies, up to 32 people can swim together. Your goal is to find and scan as much of the sea life as you can within an hour. You can drop in and out if you can't commit to that full hour. In that time, events will pop up, asking players to explore certain areas of the map for special sea life. Some of my favorite moments in this year were chilling with that friend of mine and frantically trying to find everything within the help of random players from Japan. Also worth noting, you can fast travel to any other player's position, so communication is rewarded. Number 4. Stellar Blade. It may not be anything special to me in terms of its combat, but one thing that hooked me was exploring its regions. For how large they can be, they also manage to be densely packed with secrets. Fortunately, the game gives you a scanner, so if you're diligent, you can check for collectibles, though it may not always be apparent how to reach them at first glance. You never know when you'll find a random HP upgrade or a new augment for your combat capabilities, or a graffiti art picture that you need to snap for a specific set of side quests. Look, I enjoy hide-and-seek challenges in my games. Number 3. Cat Quest 3. Cat Quest 3 can be addictive once you get into it. While there are a set of main objectives you can tackle, it's easy to get caught up in finding an island where you have no business being and poking around it. Can you handle the enemies outside your current level range? What's in that chest? What's that building doing there? What if I smacked these rocks? Every little action you take can potentially contribute to your XP, gold, or equipment loadout. With new weapon options added since the first 2 games, you may find more surprises than you expect. And the game is so breezy that you get locked into a loop of, okay, I'll check the one additional thing over there and then stop, but then you don't stop. Bonus points for being able to explore on land and on sea. Number 2, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. This is a Metroidvania after all, and it wouldn't be a good one if it didn't nail that sense of exploration. There are plenty of optional areas which task the player with a puzzle using their abilities or a platforming challenge that demands extra precision. One hugely appreciated feature is the screenshot system for your map. If you come across an area where it seems like you don't have an ability you need to progress, you can expend a memory shard to take a screenshot and have it marked on your map. Later, when you gain a new ability, you can reference the screenshot instead of backtracking all the way to that spot, only to find out, oh, that's not the right ability for that roadblock. In that way, even hitting dead ends serves to help player progress. But if we're talking Metroidvanias that reward exploration, I have to give the #1 spot to Animal Well. Its map is incredibly detailed, to the point that something like the screenshot feature isn't needed. You'll find new mysteries around every corner, or even in tiny crevices. The game does demand, to an extent, that players wander around, banging their head against walls, hoping to find a way forward, but somehow, it works without being overly frustrating. There were countless times where I stumbled onto new areas that went longer than I thought possible, and found a huge new upgrade that would change my perception of the world I'd already traversed, thus putting me back into the loop of exploring things over again. This approach forced me to learn about abilities my items had by complete accident, and with every epiphany, my sense of adventure was renewed. I won't name any specifics, because I don't want to deprive you of the same joy if you choose to play it yourself. Not every game has combat. Even some that do will also integrate puzzles. These are the most mentally stimulating games of 2024. Number 5, Dungeons of Hinterberg. Each dungeon, apart from boss dungeons or the occasional combat gauntlet, features a unique mechanic that demands the player evaluate their surroundings and try different means of utilizing that area's magic skill. Fortunately, outside of combat, they cost 0 MP, so there is no risk in experimenting to find a solution. The game is lower on my list since the complexity never gets too wild, and I do look for more of a challenge, but I assure you, the game is still quite good. Number 4, Crow Country. This is a game I only experienced by watching a playthrough, but what I saw was enough for me to include it on the list. Crow Country pays homage to classic horror titles, and that seeps into its puzzle design as well. You'll need to carefully navigate the game's theme park setting to find secrets strewn about. Piecing together information from the available notes is key to solving the game's puzzles. Some puzzles might miss the mark a bit, but by and large, the game does a good job of arming players with the information, but separating it from the context in which they need it. Not every game in UFO 50 is a puzzle game, but the games that incorporate puzzles are among my favorites. This statement applies to UFO 50's design philosophy on the whole, but each experience is crafted with simple elegance. Take camouflage. In this game, you must navigate a field as a chameleon while staying out of the enemy's line of sight. However, you can enter their line of sight if you're camouflaged. Players must choose when to change color and how to forge a safe path to the goal. Warp Tank is billed as a platformer, but I feel it also fits the bill. With a single button press, your vehicle will shift from a floor to its opposite ceiling, or vice versa. You must traverse each level without hitting spikes or getting shot. It becomes a game of careful positioning, as players evaluate the directions of walls and floors, especially sloped ones. And there are other games with puzzle elements as well, so I encourage puzzle lovers to pick up UFO 50 and find their own favorites. I touched on Animal Well's puzzle design in the exploration section. A player can end up finding a solution to a problem on complete accident by playing around. Other times, that solution comes with careful consideration of what they've seen and experienced prior. The environmental puzzles of Animal Well are baked naturally into the game. Often the problem is simply, how do I reach this spot? And the solution depends on factors such as, what items do I have? How can I use them? What features are there on this screen? How does this creature I've encountered act and react? Some post-game puzzles are overly obtuse in my opinion, but considering the experience up until the credits, I never had very few complaints. Number 1, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. Somehow, the game simultaneously gives you the answer to every puzzle and the solution to none of them. This is a classic point-and-click experience, which the game's manual will even warn you might demand classic pen and paper note-taking. And I was so down for it. The more of this game's puzzles you solve, the more recurring themes you find, which contribute to both the game's narrative as well as the player's ability to decode information for later puzzles. Shortcut doors have their own set of puzzles, which make for a nice player incentive. As you find information, Lorelei will retain it in her photographic memory at all times. So, a player will never struggle to relocate something they didn't realize was needed. I can only call the harmony between puzzles and the layering that occurs from one to the next poetic. Solutions to the final puzzle are also randomized for each save file, so don't go copying off that friend of yours. In between a game's combat, traversal, puzzles, or exploration, a player will need to interact with a game's interface and its controls. Making the process intuitive, seamless, and even engaging can be a tough task. These are the games that did the best job of it. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. During the combat section, I mentioned how the Lost Crown gives players the tools to chain together moves and juggle enemies. Such a feat would not be possible without a proper user experience. Information about your special attacks is clearly conveyed at the bottom right of the HUD, reminding players what they have equipped, which buttons they're on, and how much of the attack is charged. The button combinations needed to execute combo attacks have a nice, intuitive flow. On top of this, the in-game menus for changing your equipment loadout are functional and legible, thanks to a contrasting color highlighting options. Cat Quest III's UI takes the approach of using an array. Every equipment option you have is laid out for you, and there are different tabs to navigate to find each type. Then, scrolling down the rows of the array, you find options for your ship, magic, and more. It gets points for organization and its parchment theme fitting in with the pirate theme of the game. The game also allows players to interact with enemies in the way that they choose. An enemy's level is on clear display at all times, so if someone is feeling daring, they are absolutely free to risk their life. But others are just as free to stay away from that area until later. Enemy attacks are clearly marked with a red shadow appearing in the area they'll hit, so the player can react accordingly. Everything is quick and snappy in Astrobot. Anytime you pause the game, you can check in on the bots you've rescued so far in each level as they inhabit your controller ship. While the game will throw a number of unique abilities at you, they are all controlled with the press of right trigger, meaning the player can figure out what to do without being bogged down by tutorials. Navigating from level to level is not only easy, but a joy. You'll be flying your dual speeder ship around the world map, which also allows the opportunity to find some hidden secrets. If I had to dock the game for anything, it'd be that in some speed-running scenarios, motion-controlled elements can be strenuous to execute. In UFO 50, every game was designed with modern sensibilities, but logistically speaking, they work within the limits of what was established for games in the 1980s. This means each game has a maximum of 2 buttons and a D-pad for its controls. And if players still aren't sure how to interact with a game, the pause menu will outline the controls precisely, apart from one exception that is deliberately meant for players to figure out. Selecting one of the software's 50 games is simple as well. Players are free to try them in any order and can sort by different factors to tailor their menu navigation. Stylish UI is an Atlas staple at this point, and while some of their past titles might prioritize form over function to a legible result, Metaphor ReFantasio strikes the right balance of both. The game's painterly art direction manifests in the main menu as a streak of white paint highlights whichever option you've selected. The menu also features shortcuts mapped to buttons that are not the select button, so you can go to more frequently used menus more quickly. The battle system is where the UX truly shines. As they started doing in previous titles, your actions in battle are each mapped to a different button, meaning you don't have to navigate a long list of options. The system has improved in Metaphor when it comes to consumable items. They are now sorted neatly into tabs according to their effect, making it faster than ever to find what you're looking for. Once players experience a gameplay loop for the first time, what keeps them playing the game? How are players rewarded, and where does the game iterate on its initial loop? These are the games with the most satisfying progression systems. Number 5, another Crab's Treasure. Like any Souls-like, Krill's initial repertoire of skills is quite limited. The game will reward you for exploring its environments and defeating foes with crystals that can be spent on additional skills. Not only this, but as you find new areas, you'll encounter new types of equipable shells. Naturally, stronger options will come about. The shells in Another Crab's Treasure are each modeled after real-world objects that have polluted the game's ocean setting. Players will have some intuition about what they're capable of just from seeing them. And of course, a big part of why people enjoy the Souls-like formula is the natural progression that comes from learning an enemy's patterns and nailing parries and counterattacks. Visions of Mana starts out quite repetitive in its combat, but if you stick with the game, there is a rewarding progression system to be found. As you meet up with the spirits of the world's elements, you'll unlock a new class that varies for each party member. Battling with different classes equipped rewards the player with class experience for unlocking new abilities. These abilities are equipable and can be used across a character's different classes, meaning that trying something new might reward you with an ability that enhances a setup you already enjoyed. Here we go. I don't think as highly of Balatro as many outlets did, but I played the game, and I do understand the strong design ethos of the Joker cards. Unlocking more and more of them is the key to this game's amazing progression system. Being able to chain different effects together to maximize the payout of your poker hand is the main draw of the game. There are additional layers to each run as well, and the players can choose to upgrade different poker hands and add or subtract cards from their deck, many of which have special designs with bonus effects. Completing different milestones will give the player more starter decks to choose from, which can further impact the player's ability to find new strategies to win runs. Metaphor is a game in which the player truly never stops evolving. Over the course of the story, you'll encounter new characters, and much like Persona 3 through 5 before it, enhancing your bonds enhances your latent abilities. While this mostly opens up new classes, I was surprised to find how many passive abilities ended up changing how I played the game on a fundamental level. Each battle awards players with regular experience and class experience. The regular experience will eventually increase your level, which comes with a small permanent stat boost as one would expect. One extra point can be allocated to a stat of the player's choosing for the protagonist. Whenever you reach a level that is high enough above the enemies wandering an area, you'll be able to defeat them in action combat on the overworld. This makes a stellar reward for the player as it conveys the power difference and creates convenience. Class experience goes towards your equipped class. Just like in Visions of Mana earlier, there is a means by which skills from one class can be inherited by another, so it pays to play around and find a set of abilities you think will synergize with each other. Both battles and social interactions pay out MAG as well. This can be exchanged for cash in a pinch, but will largely be used to unlock classes and inherited skills to further expand your repertoire. I mentioned this before, but the most addictive source of progression I experienced this year was in Cat Quest 3. Combat is action-based, and every enemy drops experience and gold proportional to their level. Level-ups happen quickly and frequently. Exploring the world rewards the player in a large variety of ways, but my favorite is finding new weapons. Sometimes you won't find a new weapon altogether, but a duplicate. And the nice thing about finding a duplicate weapon is that doing so will automatically grant several levels to that weapon, because yes, each piece of equipment and each spell has its own level separate from your protagonist. It creates the opportunity for constant little upgrades that provoke the player with positive reinforcement. For all players to be able to engage with a game's world, it is important to include accessibility options. These games are the ones that I noticed did a good job of accommodating to different players. It's worth noting that I am not an expert in this field. but that I still wish to honor whichever games I am able for the sake of normalizing these options for players of any ability. With 50 games and a 2-button control scheme that can be remapped to fit a controller of choice, I feel it'd be hard not to find something accessible in UFO 50. Though, I can think of one game in the collection with a deliberately awkward control scheme that might suffer. Stellar Blade features a scanning command, which not only highlights important objects in the immediate area, but temporarily illuminates climbable surfaces as well. This game also offers a high contrast mode for visual clarity. The most valuable feature to me was the action assist option available when the combat difficulty is lowered to story mode. Besides increasing reaction time by displaying button prompts and slowing down enemy attack animations at key moments, it allows players to learn patterns in a safe environment. That said, if Eve is already in the middle of an attack animation, the prompt will not show up and the enemy attack will land. I'll admit I had to utilize the feature myself for some relentless boss enemies in particular. Motion controls and button mashing for the fishing minigame are also optional. In my section on exploration, I talked about how immensely helpful the Lost Crown's memory shard feature is, but it naturally doubles as a great accessibility option for players who have trouble navigating large maps. Additionally, there is an option for players to create portals to bypass sections of precision platforming that might demand too much in the way of inputs or timing. For combat, different aspects of the game can be adjusted individually, with a few visual options like high contrast mode, adjustable HUD size, and making interactable objects marked. The Lost Crown goes a long way to making itself accessible to players. I am fortunate not to have any disabilities that impact my ability to play video games in their default state. But the options in Another Crab's Treasure were vital to my enjoyment of the game. Different sliders for parrying and dodging windows allow each player to adjust the difficulty in just the right amount. I personally lowered them each by 1 notch and found that comfortable. In an extreme case, or just for the fun of it, you can equip Krill with a gun at any time. It one-shots every enemy in the game, yes, bosses included. So anyone looking to engage with the world and story, but not the combat, has that option. For all the company's issues, one thing Microsoft first-party efforts has consistently excelled at is including accessibility options. Ninja Theory's sequel to Hellblade is the most recent game to receive the treatment. With options for screen reading, customizable subtitles with directional indicators, colorblind modes, and even options for those who may face hurdles with the game's subject matter, Hellblade's suite of options makes it an easy choice for the top spot. One can only hope more studios will follow from Microsoft's example, at least in the realm of accessibility features. Next, we have the award for Best Multiplayer Mode, the ways that games can engage people to play together. Number 5 is Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble. If multiplayer was exclusive to the 6 online competitive modes, this might not have made my top 5. However, the entire game is actually playable online. A friend can join you in campaign stages, and you can communicate with each other to figure out optimal strategies. Since you appear as ghosts in each other's games, collision is not an issue. Think like Mario Wonders Online. The multiplayer lobbies are what salvaged my entire experience with Endless Ocean Luminous. It works best when you have at least one person in the lobby and can chat with them over Discord or something. Sure, it's a more subtle choice, but sometimes multiplayer games are simply a vehicle for socializing, and Endless Ocean Luminous was precisely that tool for me. Now, if only the online connection worked consistently well. Number 3. UFO 50 has a variety of multiplayer experiences, both co-op and versus. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to try them with another human being, so I can only speak from my time playing against the CPU. I quite enjoyed Paint Chase. I think there's a lot of potential in Quibble Race, and Bushido Ball felt like a solid experience that was similar to, of all things, Sanrio World Smash Ball. Party House, though. It was plenty of fun to play that one solitaire style, but I can see that game having a greatly different but equally fun feel if you get a friend to join in. Nintendo learned some valuable lessons from Mario Party Superstars. The core Mario Party mode is perhaps the best it's ever been in Super Mario Party Jamboree, and online play is supported, though it is perhaps a slight step back compared to Superstars. There's also a surprising lack of minigames in any individual category. It might have the highest cumulative total in Mario Party, but as an example, when motion controls are disabled, there are only 5 dual minigames. And I recently played a board where, as a result, 2 of those minigames showed up twice in succession each. The game adds toggles players have been waiting for, including an alternate pro rule set. Additions like the Koopathlon minigame mode and Bowser Kaboom Squad, this game's co-op experience, helped give it some longevity, though my sister and I were disappointed to find out that same system play is not supported in Bowser Kaboom Squad. These weird drawbacks were what knocked the game down to second place, but otherwise, you have a classic working formula with Mario Party. Pico Park 2 is a deceptive game. From the outside, you might think it looks like a shovelware experience. And while it certainly doesn't have all the polish of some larger releases, it is far from trash. I have a specific friend group that played through the entire first game together in one night. Pico Park 2 is greatly expanded, taking us multiple sessions for the main campaign, and we still have a second Kaizo-inspired campaign to try out. Stages will adapt to the number of players you have in your lobby, with a maximum of 8, to force you into cooperative platforming scenarios. In some levels, you're tethered together and need to figure out how to cross gaps or pick up floating keys. In others, you gain tools to move each other, like a magnet glove. All the while, you have the base mechanic of being able to jump on top of each other. It's a smaller, less polished experience than something like Super Mario Party Jamboree, but it is one that I greatly valued having. The foundation of the game world was built on its visuals. A system of gameplay has been established to keep players engaged with that world. But now, we move to the immersion categories. These categories are for the parts of a game that make the player feel invested in the world being built and further motivate them to engage with the gameplay. A game's soundtrack is a huge component of creating emotional resonance with the player, whether it's scoring key moments of an epic tale or providing the appropriate energy for a fight. Number 5. Unicorn Overlord. The team behind 13 Sentinels are no strangers to creating a grand soundtrack for tactical fights. While their previous game used electronic instrumentation to match its futuristic setting, this game takes things back to an orchestral sound that you'd expect from a game in a fantasy setting. Much like strategy games before it, Unicorn Overlord's battle themes dynamically change when we zoom into the action, with booming percussion, stronger stings of brass, but still being broken up by lighter touches of high-pitched strings or woodwinds. The overworld themes especially lean into the serene. The soundtrack is extensive, with nearly 5 hours of content if you play all songs uninterrupted, and it is absolutely a soundtrack to which I can largely set and forget while I work on things. The dynamics at play are masterful for lending situations the right amount of gravitas, or lack thereof in some cases. Stellar Blade surprised me with its soundtrack. Much of the game's OST is soft and arguably somber, speaking to the desolate nature of the regions you'll explore. The game adapts each of its tracks to include versions that play when you're fighting enemies. The first area provides one of the best examples of this. As you explore, you have a soft song playing with crooning vocals that lean into the ambience. But when an enemy encounter starts, the vocals are more emotive and projected louder, while the instrumentation begins to incorporate broken percussion like you might find in a trap or dubstep song. Every so often, the energy is allowed to ramp up. For boss battles and certain story sequences, we get some pop rock accompaniment, which definitely stand out for my personal tastes. Like Unicorn Overlord, this is another extensive soundtrack, passing 10 hours if you include the instrumental versions of songs. Granted, much of that runtime comes from songs that start to run together in my mind, and the different variants that play in different contexts. Some of the instrumental area themes do start to blur together to me, which is why I can't rank this game any higher than number 4, but if you're looking for this year's source of chill lo-fi beats with an occasional sprinkle of rock, look no further. Number 3, Tekken 8. This is the one soundtrack on this list from a game I did not play, but in my due diligence, I took a listen knowing that Tekken famously has great tracks. 8 is no exception, and I'm surprised I'm not hearing more people praise it. I largely enjoy this soundtrack for its electronic beats and melodies. It might be the best soundtrack for my workout routine to come out in 2024, because the energy provided by synth lines and dubstep percussion is massive. I'm not really into the scene of technical 2D fighters. Heck, I'm not even great at a casual version like Smash Brothers, so I don't see myself playing the game. But I can easily imagine how much these tracks pump up fighters for the chaotic back and forth they're about to experience. Tekken is also not afraid to dip into the silly when it comes to providing the right ambience for its arenas. One of the past games featured a yodeling track, but as an example in 8, we find a Baroque track. I needn't say more to fuel your curiosity to listen for yourself. Number 2, Penny's Big Breakaway. 5 words, T. Lopes and Sean Bialo. These are 2 names that need to have eyes on them whenever they put out a soundtrack. The backing for Penny's Big Breakaway is absolutely phenomenal. My personal tastes lean towards these frantic energy tracks that are delivered with a cool bass riff, smooth brass, and the soundtrack's main draw, epic keyboard solos. Every few measures, the percussion line manages to add an extra flair to any song, whether it's the classic use of double time or toms played in triplets. It keeps any track from becoming too mundane or repetitive. There's a few songs thrown in that would be easy to relax to as well, and the composers are no stranger to creating a chill groove. My number 1 soundtrack came out of nowhere. A friend recommended this one, and I got hooked instantly. So much so that I ended up buying the game and playing it myself when I had previously had no intention of doing so. Yars Rising is a revival of a classic Atari IP headed by WayForward. This new entry takes the form of a Metroidvania and stars Emi Kimura, a hacker under the alias Yar. As she explores the depths of an antagonistic corporation she's infiltrated, she is accompanied by the music playing through her earbuds. The game cycles through a good number of tracks, and so many of them are top-notch pop hits. I wasn't expecting so many vocal tracks, but they come out in full force. With a good number of contributing artists, including the aforementioned Sean Bialo, the tracks also have some variety in their tone and instrumentation. You can find a continuous mega mix arrangement of the soundtrack on WayForward's official channel, and I've turned it on many times while working. Take everything I praised Tekken 8 and Penny's soundtracks for, and push it through a meat grinder dripping in funk, disco, and vaporwave style, and you get the impeccable work of Yars Rising. A game's sound goes beyond its backing music. Sound effects are equally important to the immersion, extending to those both produced by in-game enemies, objects, and those found in menus. Number 5, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. The attack sounds in this game are on point. The right sound effect is another contributing factor in helping the player feel powerful, and for emphasizing when they nail parries and counters. Various hazards, i.e. saw bleeds, show up in the game, and their sounds lend just the right air of intimidation. Number 4, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. Your footsteps echo down the barren hallways. Your clothes rustle as you take those steps. You flip through the pages of notes and manuscripts in search of answers. Doors creak open or thud to a halt due to being locked. Every sound in Lorelei contributes to a feeling of unease. While the game isn't a horror experience per se, it is a mystery first and foremost, just as its sounds convey. I also want to shout out the sound effects that are used on the pause menu. Number 3. Animal Well. What the game lacks in a standout soundtrack, it more than makes up for with ambience. As you explore the depths of the Animal Well, eerie and unfamiliar sounds will fill the air. I also want to shout out the satisfying sound that plays when part of the environment breaks. The game would not be the same without its fantastic sound cues that somehow serve the dual purpose of guiding and confusing you. Number 2. Balatro. I wish to remind you that while it wasn't for me, I appreciate what Balatro brought to the table and what other people got out of it. I have to imagine that the sound design was a driving factor in the game getting its hooks into people. As players experiment with the Joker cards, eventually they might hit upon a strategy that will land them a large payout in their current run. Whenever a slew of effects are triggered and the payout is pushed to higher and higher quantities, the accompanying sounds perfectly encapsulate the rush of excitement and the sheer volume of the increasing value. I cannot imagine the game taking off if it had not nailed that sensation. However, I give the slight edge to the game I enjoyed more. Number 1, Astrobot. Team Asobi is one of the few developers who take full advantage of the PlayStation 5 hardware. This extends into using the controller's speaker and haptics to add an extra layer of immersion to the sound design. As Astro traverses different surfaces, fires his lasers, or employs any of his various power-ups, you get a sound that delivers the appropriate feedback to the player. To an earlier point I made about Astrobot, the game often shows off how many objects can be rendered without missing a beat, and when you have Astro interact with these objects, the sounds follow suit. All of this is wrapped up in a cute package where your fellow bots' cries of joy will make you happy you took the time to rescue them. Some games feature voice acting as another means of bringing characters to life. These were my favorite performances from across the year, but please note, while I might use specific characters and actors as examples, I am determining my choice based on the overall quality of the ensemble cast. Number 5, the plucky squire is on this list for the narrator alone. After all, he's the only voice-acted character, but the performance is full of charm. The game scenes are read out precisely how you'd expect a good children's book to be read aloud. The narrator fully embraces not only his character, but the ones whose lines he reads off the page. Thank goodness you're here is a fun time. The game scenes are fully voice acted, and with it being a British developed game with a British sense of humor, you can expect a British voice cast. The crew had a lot of fun delivering their lines. They maintain composure amidst all the chaotic events of the game and react to it with the straight man style that the writing demands. Jasper the Handyman is a standout example for his vindictiveness. Frightful things occur in MEO, The Smiling Man. While the game is not fully voice acted, many of the lines are. Albeit a Japanese dub is the only one available, but I don't think speaking a different language should preclude me from honoring the work that was done. This game's voice acting shines brightest when the cast is giving their all to scenes that demand shock, fear, or sadness. Megumi's voice actress in particular truly sells the heartbreak of a teenage girl dealing with her friend's death. I don't want to say anything that would spoil later events, but the endgame in particular has highly noteworthy performances that truly embody tortured souls. In honesty, the main protagonist might actually be one of the weaker performances. Arzette might be paying homage to the classics of questionable quality. However, the game's voice cast does not fall into that category. Their performances are nothing short of percolating. Each character's voice conveys a different type of zany personality, and the cheesy, exaggerated deliveries fit right in with the tone of the game. There is a great range on display across the voice cast, and while it had been easy to phone in a performance for a game made to evoke memories of poor quality, the game is better for having done just the opposite. It's hard to top the level of quality that the voice actors for the Atlas games bring, and Metaphor ReFantazio is no exception. It's hard to pick any one character who stands out from the rest of the cast. To name a few, I love the delivery of Heisme's lines, simultaneously conveying a stoic wisdom from age and the grief that will follow him throughout his life. Hulkenberg is a fan favorite for a reason. She brings a sense of bravado befitting a knight, but can also convey the anxiety plaguing her from past failures. Luis Guillaburn, the central antagonist, is a personal favorite of mine. He speaks with wholehearted conviction, despite being perceived as the villain. And there are plenty of moments where the voice actor really lays into the protagonists. These are only the tips of the iceberg. Every social interaction is fully voiced, and the side characters' performances should not be slept on. In a rare feat, our protagonist actually has a canonical voice of his own. I can't say every line is delivered perfectly, but I was pleasantly surprised a number of times listening to his voice actor's delivery in some of the more heartfelt moments of the story. Sometimes a compelling story is all it takes to bring players into your world. Our next award is for the best overarching narrative. Sometimes the best laid narrative has a simple objective. Mario wants to rescue Princess Peach, Turnip Boy has committed tax evasion, and Krill just wants his shell back after being audited. But things ramp up quickly. The scope of Krill's quest goes well beyond what he would have imagined, and a cast of supporting characters help him find his way. Another Crab's Treasure does a great job of world building with the looming threat of pollution impacting the ocean environment. Some boss characters' backstories get especially creepy. Krill's character development ends up being the star of the show, as we see him transform from his reclusive self. One might say, he comes out of his shell. Within Metaphor's typical RPG fare, defeating a central villain with the goal of taking over the world, comes a deeper message about anxieties and insecurities. You'll see these themes play out in a myriad of small character stories that each contribute to the party members coming together. I particularly like when a game's storytelling is inextricably tied to its gameplay mechanics, and Metaphor succeeds in this regard by introducing new status ailments, such as the aforementioned anxiety, on top of the returning Atlas staples. They are even separated into physical and mental ailments to put additional emphasis on the message of promoting mental health. All of this is packed into a solid story in which a villain makes devious ploys that will leave you guessing how our protagonist will take him down, and at times, even if they should. Before MEO even released, producer Sakamoto claimed the game's ending would be divisive. I won't spoil it in this video, but that statement alone was the sign of a clearly defined vision. MEO chose its lane and committed to it wholesale. It may seem like the main story deviates from its path at times, but each seeming deviation adds a new personal touch from a variety of characters. Seeing how they parallel the main conflict in the end contributes to that cohesive vision. The final half hour of the game is the pinnacle of the experience, and it manages to bring together everything that the player experienced leading up to it. When you play 1000 Resist for the first time, you will have absolutely no idea what is happening. In fact, when I first played, I assumed that my dialogue options were just poorly localized and would have made more sense in the original Chinese. It wouldn't be until later in the game, when I had an epiphany, that they were actually just lingo being used by the residents of the game's fictional universe. In hindsight, I came to appreciate the en media res structure of the opening, as it communicated what it's like to be an outsider looking in on a world they do not comprehend. Then, in the first chapter of the prologue, I thought I was viewing the biography of a Chinese American who was a victim of bullying. But as I kept playing, I found the story would go much deeper than that. While there are parallels to real-world events impacting diaspora communities, the story of the game stands on its own with sci-fi premises. The game is not afraid to shift viewpoints, whether the player realizes it or not. There are a number of shocking turns, and for its occasional gruesome imagery, the game will not be for everyone. But I don't consider it to be a fault of the game. It has a message to deliver about our reality, and that reality is messy. A good mystery often makes for a compelling narrative. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes is a game that starts you with very little information and constantly leaves you wondering how the pieces will fit together until the very end. What drove this story to my top spot is how the solutions to the game's puzzles are connected to the larger story. When I talked about the game's puzzle design, I mentioned that you will find recurring themes, because they show up so frequently. It feels like you've always known the answer, but never the rationale. And that might sound frustrating at first, but as the pieces come together, you start to see the big picture. In the end, the game will have you separating fact from fiction, interpreting all the signs you've seen, and filling out the timeline of events. The main narrative is the timeline of main events with recurring themes and messages, but sometimes the heart of a game's story is in the character interactions. This next award goes to the games in which, regardless of the overall story, the characters are a joy to see in action with the player and each other. This is where I have to admit that I didn't stick with Unicorn Overlord long enough to know if the overarching narrative was anything worth pursuing. For as far as I got, it seemed like it was a simple tale of defeat the Dark Lord, but perhaps there are twists I wasn't privy to. But in what I did play, before falling off the game, I at least got to see some strong interactions between ally units. The game deserves praise for how many character interactions it manages to pack in, especially when you factor in that some quests have branching outcomes and any characters involved will react accordingly with their own beliefs. Well, I did mention another Crab's Treasure side characters briefly in the last section, so now to elaborate. Once Krill leaves his secluded home, he'll slowly happen across more and more characters that form his impression of the outside world. Eventually, he finds himself in a highly populated city where our core cast is solidified. With the city serving as a hub to which you'll return between missions, you'll slowly build your relationships with the residents. It is a joy to see Krill change their attitudes and for them to change Krill in turn. Although in some cases, it's more of a joy to see people get their comeuppance. But hey, characters you love to hate can be fun in their own way. I'm not sure if I can say the main protagonist of Thank Goodness You're Here ever forms a real connection with anyone they encounter. In fact, they just kind of hit a bunch of things and stuff happens. But therein lies the genius of the game. Seeing the characters react to the wild outcomes the player hijinks is a joy in its own. But it retains that joy factor when characters' minisodes end up tying into each other by the end. Eventually the whole town comes together for one final set of antics. Dungeons of Hinterberg is ultimately a mishmash of elements from 3D Zeldas, that being the titular dungeons, and Persona. Between dungeons, the player is given a choice of characters to interact with. Much like Persona and Metaphor, increasing your relationship level will net your rewards that can buff your abilities in combat. Compared to those games, these interactions take place in a more relaxed environment. Our character is on holiday, after all. What they lack in high-stakes conflicts, they make up for in furthering our understanding of how different folks are reacting to the events of the main story, which would otherwise have been sidelined in favor of the main gameplay exploring dungeons. I loved the voice performances in Metaphor, and it's not a stretch to say that the character writing serving as the base of those performances is also noteworthy. One telltale sign of strong writing is a well-written set of antagonists. When interacting with them, you can understand their motivations, even if you disagree with the approach. But of course, the social interactions with your party members and NPC allies are the biggest highlights. The central conflict of the game is fueled by the world's extreme division between the 8 races of people, and the recent onslaught of attacks from monsters known as humans. Seeing the side stories play out from characters across the different races helps build the player's foundational understanding of the world. Unlike Dungeons of the Hinterberg, Metaphor retains the high-stakes conflict appearing in each character's side story, but many go in unexpected directions. I think anyone who plays Metaphor owes it to themselves to give the side stories a chance, even if they typically crit path the main story when they play other games. Finally, there are a few miscellaneous categories that fell outside the scope of the visuals, gameplay, and immersion, as these pertain to specific types of releases. This category is for games that were released prior to 2024, but received additional free or paid content in 2024. And before I go into it, please note I did not play Elden Ring or its DLC. The mystery in Monoff is just an excuse to backtrack through areas of Disney Illusion Island. Having already 100%ed the game before the update, it was a needless back and forth that gave some slight development to a recurring character. Honestly, this update seems better for players who have not already played the game, because then you'll see the character development unfold alongside the main story, and finding his MacGuffins wouldn't require extensive backtracking. Toward the end of the year, Bug Fables hit its 5th anniversary. In an unexpected but really cool move, the developers have released update version 1.2. The game now features fishing, a boss fight against your own party members, and new medals to further customize your playthrough. Atari 50 was already a really cool collection, featuring not only historic archives of 50 classic Atari titles, all playable, including some previously unreleased prototypes, but also documentary segments and pieces of memorabilia to give players full context for that history. This year, 2 waves of DLC were released to expand the collection of games and interviews. F-Zero 99 got a lot more updates than I expected for a game in a franchise that Nintendo hasn't touched in decades. In fact, there were 5 content updates in 2024, all free. Across these updates, the game's playable tracks, vehicles, and modes have all been greatly expanded. One update in particular gave us content that originated from the Satellaview F-Zero remake. It's been great to see so much enthusiasm around the game, and this almost snagged my top spot. But ultimately, I have more attachment to the Splatoon franchise, and we got some sizable updates this year. For one thing, the paid expansion Side Order finally came out, injecting roguelike elements into a new single-player campaign. While the mission structure can get repetitive, it pays to switch up which types of color chips you equip or which weapon kit you bring into the fray. The game encourages you to master a dozen different weapon kits. Things can get surprisingly difficult if you get careless. And yet, that wasn't all that we'd hear from Splatoon 3. To commemorate the end of content updates, we were treated to Grand Festival, a final Splatfest which transformed the Splatlands into a proper festival grounds with dedicated performances from the in-game idols. Tricolor battles took place on a special stage, and under the right conditions, the idols repping your team would show up to cheer you on in the final minute. It's hard to convey the sheer joy that players like me would experience just from walking around the festival grounds and seeing everything from the last 3 games come together. I honestly don't know where Splatoon goes next from here, but I wish more Splatfests had played out like Grand Festival. For most of these awards, I wanted to pay homage to new, original titles. However, there is value to be found in a modern update to an old favorite. This category contains the best re-releases for this year. What little I've played of Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake has impressed me. it's a very good game for the Switch's handheld mode. The HD 2D style has delivered many beautiful landscapes, but it's continuously evolved. Triangle Strategy, Live Alive, and Star Ocean: The Second Story each took different strides in fine-tuning the style, and Dragon Quest III is the latest in that series. The game holds up pretty well for a modern audience, in large part due to its class system. Your party can be customized by hiring characters from different classes, and the remake adds a nod to Dragon Quest monsters in the form of a all-new Monster Wrangler vocation. So even previous fans of the game can have a whole new experience to gain in this remake. Shadow Generations is a new campaign added alongside a remake of Sonic Generations, so there's an obvious parallel to Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. But the new 3D overworld connecting Shadow's levels makes that comparison even more noticeable. I didn't feel anything in the new campaign qualified for the earlier top 5s, but this edition is a welcome one for Sonic fans. Each level in the new campaign helps to fill gaps in Sonic's history that have emerged since the original release of Generations. As an example, we get a stage based on Sonic Forces. I think the team did a solid job of creating a unique new movement set for Shadow that allowed players to combine combat with platforming, such as being able to send an enemy flying, and then being able to home in on them to instantly teleport to that new location. Together with this new story that gives some new context to old characters, the campaign is a worthwhile romp for Sonic series fans. By far, the game I put the most hours into this year was Shin Megami Tensei 5. I was initially just going to check out the new campaign that came out with the Vengeance re-release, but then decided it would be worthwhile to go back and see how the original campaign played out, since I had never initially finished it. And then I'd have a reference for changes to the story. So yeah, I played 2 versions of Shin Megami Tensei 5, and I did so back to back. For changes in the base game, there are a number of quality of life improvements. Rails were added to the overworld for quick travel, and it was a huge help. Other changes, like being able to save any time or using multiple items at once, would probably have been best in the initial release, but are appreciated nonetheless. As for the new Canon of Destruction campaign, it changes a surprising amount of the original story. For one thing, you have a new antagonistic force and a new party member. The events of the story take a different turn, and character moments that come as a result of interacting with your new party member reveal new layers that didn't have a chance to manifest in the canon of creation. The story leans into the theme of revenge, which could have fallen into the trap of simply saying, "Revenge is bad, never do it," but instead manages to show some pros and cons to the mindset. The story's events take you to an all-new area not seen in the original campaign, and aesthetically, it's my favorite area in the game. I urge Atlas RPG fans not to sleep on the new content in this game. As far as new content goes, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door on Switch doesn't offer much, but also not nothing. However, it's a beautiful refinement of the original game, which had mechanics standing the test of time. Backtracking has always been part of the series, and it's not like you'll suddenly find it totally absent in the remake. Some of it served a genuine purpose, but in some areas the amount has been reduced through the addition of new warp pipes. I completely vouch for the inclusion of a new pipe travel hub beneath Rogueport. Even as a kid playing the original Thousand-Year Door as one of my first ever video games, I found it odd how 4 areas had blue pipes connecting them and the others did not. Especially since 2 of those areas already had pipes not far from their blue counterparts. The few additional fights that got added to the game appeal to longtime fans of the original game by answering some long unanswered questions about certain side characters, and boy, do they put your skill to the test. Also, I have to mention that the new localization for one party member's storyline is greatly appreciated. Positive representation matters, and anyone prepared to argue this point can kindly take their views elsewhere. Edging out Paper Mario slightly is Persona 3 Reloaded. Yes, when you count that, and Metaphor, and 2 versions of Shin Megami Tensei 5, I played 3, arguably 4, Atlas games in a single year. Paper Mario was already a fundamentally great game, and despite the increased backtracking, I could easily fall right back into my original GameCube copy comfortably. But Persona 3 Reload greatly modernizes a game with a weaker foundation. The remake offers enhanced visuals that fall in line with modern Atlas design philosophies, of course, but the soundtrack is also expanded. The new anime opening might be the best in the Persona series so far, and I greatly appreciate the new battle theme. It's going down now. The original tracks are also re-recorded to, mostly, great results. I know people have mixed feelings about the new voice cast, and that one member of the voice cast in particular is problematic. But I think that again, for the most part, what we get in Reload is an improvement over the original. Where the game has seen the most growth, however, is in one of the central mechanics, the Tower of Tartarus. Unlike Persona 5, Persona 3 includes only one dungeon in the base game, and it has procedurally generated floors outside of boss encounters. The original game could be heavy on grinding for experience, but in the remake, a few tweaks are made so that Tartarus is actually a fun place to visit. Along the way, you'll now occasionally find monad doors, which provide extra challenging fights in exchange for better experience and equipment. Making things tougher might sound like the opposite of the correct approach to fixing a grinding problem, but the fights are optional, and winning them ultimately does mean less grinding because of the better rewards. I talked more about these doors in my video on doors in video games. Yes, that's a real thing. Also now appearing in Tartarus is a door with a clock. If you open special chests on a floor, the door has a chance to spawn near the stairs. Inside, you choose 2 party members to level up to match your protagonist level at the end of their next fight. This means keeping levels even between party members has never been easier. Another way in which grinding required is reduced. Combat has also seen an update in the form of the Theurgy gauge. During battle, performing certain character-dependent actions will fill this gauge and enable you to use an ultimate attack. These can help you bypass more annoying enemy combinations and deal more damage to bosses who might otherwise resist your attacks. On top of this, the game adopts the One More system from Persona 5, although here it is renamed to Shift. I think the additional convenience of these options outweighs any sense that they make the game too easy. For me at least, and I was playing on normal. The last major change that I will mention here is your navigator's functionality. That is to say, the navigator character is functional. They did it. She has her own set of skills, and she can spend her own SP to help the party with buffs, avoiding enemy detection, and more. I love this extra layer, and I hope it is retained in future Persona projects. With all these changes, the game still tells the same compelling story of the original. Your mileage will vary on some of these changes, but I took to them well, and I think the Persona series newcomers stand to benefit the most from them. This penultimate category is pretty much a series of Because I Said So awards. These were some good qualities from games that didn't fit into any of the previous categories. Thank Goodness You're Here is the game of 2024 that I feel made the best use of comedic shock value. The game scenarios often fly off the handle. It's an experience I highly recommend sharing with a friend to have a shared laugh over. As an added bonus, this is the only game of the year that I can think of where the developers encourage male correspondence at the end of the game. Neva has a strong use of a companion character. It would have been easy for the game to rely on the tropes of escort missions that often annoy players. However, Neva is a companion who grows alongside you. In each chapter, you see them become more and more capable. It gets to a point where they even become your ranged attack option and your mount. Emil the Smiling Man pours everything into its epilogue. It is a huge risk with the potential to alienate players from the fanbase. But never before have I seen the last 30 minutes of a game justify the existence of the rest of the game. For me, the ending works, but I can see where it will leave other players uncertain or outright hating it. Perhaps you've heard the analogy of watching a train wreck. It is an expression people use to convey that what they're seeing is tragic, but somehow too captivating, too demanding of your attention for you to look away from. But in the case of Emeo's epilogue, it is as if that same train wreck simultaneously answered all your burning questions and gave you the resolution that you have long sought after. Speaking of train wrecks, I love the Patrick Star game. It really couldn't qualify for any of the main categories, but I had a great deal of fun playing in a physics sandbox version of Bikini Bottom. The game gives you objectives to shoot for, but at some point you will end up messing around just to see what's possible. I myself found some hilarious results from combining elements that I picked up in the overworld. And the thing is, the game and its developers have to be aware of how ridiculous it can get, because some of the objectives the game tracks are in locations that seem like they should be out of reach by normal means. It felt like to beat the game, I had to break the game. It is a beautiful, broken mess. But the number one unique achievement is a short new entry in a series to which I have a strong emotional attachment. In just a To the Moon series beach episode, we get to spend some vacation time with the Sigmund Core crew. And while it might sound like a non-canon one-off game from the title, by the end, you do get a surprising revelation about the overarching plot of the series. No spoilers here. It'll take like 2 hours for you to find out yourself if you play it. That said, a particular feature I wish to shout out is an area of the beach. When you go there, you can chill to lo-fi arrangements of the series music and use your trusty metal detector to find hidden messages in bottles. These messages were submitted by Kickstarter backers. Just to be clear, I am not among them, so you cannot find a message from me in the game. I think it's a fun, unobtrusive way to honor the fans. You will certainly encounter some written in a language you can't read, but each of them give off powerful, positive vibes. Some share gratitude, some share affirmations, and on the whole, it's the type of thing I think we need more of in games media, and in our day-to-day lives. Across the various categories, I've talked at length about why I enjoy each of these games. So now, in no particular order, I present my top 5 overall games of 2024 in the form of this musical tribute. And now for the winner. The best game of 2024, according to me, is UFO 50. It may not have a grand story or any high-budget animation or acting, but it is a compilation of games that each have inventive new mechanics. And more than any game on this list, it is a celebration of the gaming medium as a whole. You can experience it alone, together with friends, or become immersed in the thriving community of players to share tricks and secrets. With so many experiences packed into one piece of software, I think every player can find something that speaks to them and offers the gratification that only a well-crafted system of push and pull can offer. UFO 50 reminds us to stay playful, and it is brought to us by a small independent team with a shining vision for the future. I am happy to name it my personal best game of 2024. Remember to let me know about your own thoughts in the comments below, or join the Discord to talk about things at length and customize notifications about future content. Speaking of which, please consider liking the video or subscribing if you like what I've put together here. I took a chance on some of these new categories for awards, so your feedback is appreciated. I hope that 2025 is good to all of us. And next time, I'll be back with a video about which games that year I'm looking forward to the most.